Karen Thompson was not your average suburban woman. She lived in a quiet cul-de-sac where everyone knew each other, or at least pretended to. Karen, however, wasn't pretending. She prided herself on knowing everything about everybody and making sure her neighbors followed the rules she set as the president of their homeowners association, HOA. To some, she was seen as a dedicated leader who kept the neighborhood looking pristine. To others, she was an overbearing busybody who couldn't stay out of anyone else's business. Every morning, Karen would sip her coffee while standing by her living room window, watching the street like it was her personal kingdom. If someone left their trash cans out past collection day, Karen would march over with a clipboard in hand, ready to lecture them about HOA guidelines. If a car was parked on the driveway instead of inside the garage, she'd send a strongly worded email reminding the homeowner of the aesthetic standards they all agreed to when they moved in. Her obsession with control bordered on comical, but also deeply frustrating for her neighbors. One Tuesday morning started off like any other. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and Karen was already dressed in her signature khakis and polo shirt, armed with a fresh cup of coffee and her trusty notebook. As she stood at her window, scanning the street for anything out of place, something unusual caught her eye. A large delivery truck had pulled into the cul-de-sac, its engine rumbling loudly as it came to a stop in front of Harold Jenkins's house. Harold was an elderly man who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. He was kind-hearted, soft-spoken, and well-liked by everyone except maybe Karen, who thought his slightly unkempt garden was an eyesore. Recently, Harold had undergone major surgery and needed specialized medical equipment to help him recover, at home. This delivery, he hoped, contained the custom-made device that would make his life easier. But Karen didn't know any of that. All she saw was a big, unmarked crate being unloaded from the back of the truck. Her eyes narrowed as she watched the scene unfold. What could possibly require such a large package? And why hadn't Harold informed the HOA beforehand? In Karen's mind, this was yet another example of someone disregarding the rules she worked so hard to enforce. Without wasting a second, Karen grabbed her phone and headed outside. She marched across her perfectly manicured lawn, her heels clicking against the pavement until she reached the delivery driver. The poor man looked startled. As Karen approached him, her face set in a stern expression. "What is this?" Karen demanded, pointing at the crate. "Why are you delivering this here?" The driver blinked, taken aback by her aggressive tone. "It's for Mr. Jenkins," he replied calmly, holding up the paperwork attached to his clipboard. "See? His name and address are right here." Karen snatched the clipboard from his hands and scanned the documents. Sure enough, the delivery was addressed to Harold Jenkins. But that didn't matter to Karen. Rules were rules, and in her world, there was no room for exceptions. "This is unacceptable," she declared, handing the clipboard back to the driver. "You can't just drop something this size in our neighborhood without prior approval. It violates the HOA guidelines." The driver sighed, clearly used to dealing with difficult customers. "Ma'am, I'm following company policy. This is a scheduled delivery, and I have to leave the item here." Karen crossed her arms, refusing to budge. "Not if it breaks the rules. Take it away or I'll call the authorities." At this point, Harold emerged from his house leaning heavily on his cane. He had heard the commotion and wanted to see what was going on. When he saw Karen arguing with the driver, his heart sank. "Is there a problem?" he asked weakly, trying to keep his voice steady. Karen spun around to face him, her expression smug. "Yes, Harold, there's a problem. This thing," she gestured dramatically at the crate, "is completely inappropriate for our community. It's unsightly, disruptive, and frankly, a violation of HOA regulations." Harold shook his head, feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Karen, this is medical equipment. I need it to recover from my surgery. You can't just stop it from being delivered." She waved off his explanation, dismissing it as irrelevant. "That doesn't change the fact that it's against the rules. If you wanted to bring something like this into the neighborhood, you should have submitted a request to the HOA board first." By now, a small crowd of curious neighbors had gathered, drawn by the noise. Some looked sympathetic toward Harold, while others seemed amused by Karen's antics. The delivery driver, sensing the situation was only going to get worse, decided to step aside and let Karen handle things. After all, it wasn't his job to mediate disputes between homeowners. Seeing that the driver was no longer willing to argue, Karen took matters into her own hands. She whipped out her phone and dialed the number for the HOA board members. One by one, she called them, insisting that the delivery was a violation and demanding immediate action. By the time she hung up, several board members had reluctantly agreed to support her decision to block the truck's exit. With the driver stuck and Harold too frail to fight back, Karen made her final move. Under the pretense of protecting the neighborhood, she ordered the crate removed from Harold's driveway and dragged it, quite literally, into her own garage. Neighbors watched in stunned silence as Karen commandeered the delivery, acting as though she had every right to do so. What Karen failed to consider, however, was the value of the equipment inside the crate. Worth thousands of dollars and specifically designed for Harold's needs, the device was far more than just a nuisance. It was essential for his health and well-being. Little did Karen know, her actions were about to spiral into something much bigger than a simple HOA dispute. As the dust settled and the neighbors dispersed, Harold stood alone on his porch, staring helplessly at Karen's closed garage door. He knew he couldn't take on Karen by himself, but he also knew he couldn't give up. His next step would involve contacting the manufacturer to report the missing shipment, and that's when the real trouble began. Harold Jenkins wasn't the kind of man to cause trouble. At 72 years old, he had spent most of his life avoiding conflict and keeping to himself. But as he stood on his porch that morning, watching Karen Thompson march the large crate into her garage like it was her own personal property, Harold felt a wave of emotions he hadn't experienced in years: anger, frustration, and helplessness. This wasn't just about some random delivery. This was about something vital to his recovery and quality of life. The medical equipment inside that crate had been custom-made for him. It was designed to assist with mobility after a recent surgery that left him weak and dependent on others. Without it, Harold would struggle even more than he already did. He couldn't imagine how Karen could justify taking something so important. Was she really that blind to the consequences of her actions, or did she simply not care? Determined to fix the situation, Harold shuffled back inside his house and picked up the phone. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed the number for the company that manufactured the equipment. After a few rings, a customer service representative answered. Harold explained what had happened, describing how the delivery truck had arrived, only for Karen to intervene and confiscate the item. The representative listened patiently, typing notes as Harold spoke. When he finished, there was a brief pause before the voice on the other end said, "Mr. Jenkins, I'm very sorry to hear about this. That equipment is highly specialized and extremely valuable. We'll need to report this immediately to our legal team and work with local authorities to recover it." Hearing those words gave Harold a small sense of relief. At least someone understood the gravity of the situation. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get worse before they got better. The idea of involving the police made him uneasy, but he knew it might be the only way to get his equipment back. Meanwhile, Karen was busy patting herself on the back for a job well done. Back in her garage, she stood over the crate, arms crossed, convinced she had saved the neighborhood from yet another eyesore. She imagined her fellow HOA members praising her for her quick thinking and dedication to maintaining the community's standards. What she didn't realize, or perhaps refused to acknowledge, was that her actions had crossed a line far beyond any HOA guideline. Word of the incident spread quickly through the neighborhood. By lunchtime, nearly everyone knew what had happened. Some residents were outraged on Harold's behalf, while others whispered behind closed doors, speculating whether Karen had finally gone too far. A few brave souls even approached Harold to offer their support. One neighbor, Lisa, knocked on Harold's door later that afternoon. She was a young mother who lived 2 houses down and had always found Karen's behavior exasperating. "I heard about what happened," Lisa said gently as Harold opened the door. "Are you okay?" Harold sighed, leaning on his cane for support. "I'll be fine, I suppose, but I don't know what to do. That equipment is critical for my recovery, and now it's sitting in Karen's garage like it belongs to her. Lisa frowned, shaking her head. This is ridiculous. There has to be something we can do to help you get it back. While Harold appreciated Lisa's concern, he knew it wouldn't be easy. Karen wasn't the type to admit she was wrong, especially when it came to enforcing HOA rules. Even if half the neighborhood disagreed with her, she still held enough influence to make people hesitate before challenging her directly. As the day wore on, Harold decided to visit one of his closest friends in the neighborhood, Ralph. Ralph was a retired lawyer who had lived next door to Harold for over 20 years. If anyone could provide sound advice, it was him. Ralph listened intently as Harold recounted the events of the morning. When Harold finished, Ralph leaned back in his chair, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "This isn't just an HOA issue anymore," he said finally. "Karen took possession of something that doesn't belong to her. That's theft, plain and simple." Harold nodded slowly. "That's what the manufacturer said too. They're going to involve the police." Ralph raised an eyebrow. "Good, let them handle it, but in the meantime we should document everything. Write down exactly what happened, take photos if you can, and gather statements from any witnesses. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case will be." Feeling a renewed sense of purpose, Harold thanked Ralph and headed home to start gathering the necessary information. Over the next few hours, he wrote a detailed account of the incident, snapped pictures of Karen's garage where the crate was being stored, and reached out to several neighbors who had witnessed the confrontation. Each person he spoke to expressed disbelief at Karen's audacity and promised to cooperate fully if called upon. Unbeknownst to Harold, news of the stolen equipment had already reached higher levels. The manufacturer, alarmed by the report of grand theft, contacted local law enforcement to file a formal complaint. Detective Sarah Reynolds, a seasoned investigator known for her sharp instincts and no-nonsense attitude, was assigned to the case. Detective Reynolds wasted no time diving into the details. She reviewed the documentation provided by the manufacturer and spoke with Harold over the phone to get his side of the story. As she listened to his account, she couldn't help but feel a mix of sympathy and irritation. Sympathy for Harold, who was clearly struggling without the equipment he needed, and irritation at the absurdity of the situation. How could someone think it was acceptable to hijack a delivery like this? To piece together the full picture, Sarah began interviewing other key players. She spoke with the delivery driver, who described Karen's aggressive behavior and unwillingness to listen to reason. She also reached out to several neighbors, many of whom corroborated Harold's version of events and expressed frustration with Karen's leadership style. But the breakthrough came when Sarah reviewed footage from a neighbor's security camera. One resident, Mark, had installed a Ring doorbell outside his house, and its wide-angle lens had captured the entire scene. The video showed Karen confronting the delivery driver, inspecting the crate, and then dragging it into her garage. It was undeniable proof of her involvement. Armed with this evidence, Sarah obtained a warrant to search Karen's property. She knew the case was strong, but she also anticipated resistance. People like Karen rarely admitted fault, especially when cornered. Still, Sarah was confident that justice would prevail. As the sun set over the cul-de-sac, Karen remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. She sat in her living room, scrolling through emails and drafting a lengthy update for the HOA board about her successful intervention. In her mind, she had done nothing wrong. To her, the crate was just another obstacle standing between her vision of perfection and reality. What Karen failed to understand was that perfection, at least the kind she pursued, came at a cost. And soon, she would learn just how high that cost truly was. Detective Sarah Reynolds arrived at the cul-de-sac early the next morning, her presence immediately drawing attention. Dressed in a crisp navy blue blazer and slacks, with a badge clipped to her belt, she exuded authority and purpose. Neighbors peeked through their curtains or lingered on their porches, whispering among themselves as they watched her step out of her unmarked police car. The news had spread quickly that an actual detective was investigating Karen's actions, and everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Sarah wasted no time getting to work. Her first stop was Harold Jenkins' house. She knocked gently on the door, and Harold answered after a moment, leaning heavily on his cane. His face lit up slightly when he saw the detective standing there. "Mr. Jenkins?" she asked politely, introducing herself. "I'm Detective Sarah Reynolds. I've been assigned to look into the theft of your medical equipment." Harold nodded, inviting her inside. He led her to the living room where they sat down, and he recounted the entire story once again. This time, though, Sarah listened with keen attention, jotting notes in a small notebook. She asked thoughtful questions about the delivery process, Karen's behavior, and how the equipment was essential for his recovery. Harold answered honestly, his voice steady despite the frustration still lingering beneath the surface. When Sarah finished speaking with Harold, she thanked him and promised to keep him updated. Before leaving, she glanced around his modest home, noticing the signs of someone who valued simplicity and kindness. It was clear that Harold wasn't the type to make waves, which made Karen's treatment of him all the more infuriating. Next, Sarah headed to Karen's house. She walked up the driveway, her steps deliberate and measured, and rang the doorbell. Moments later, Karen opened the door, her expression shifting from curiosity to indignation when she saw the detective standing there. "Can I help you?" Karen asked sharply, her tone already defensive. "I'm Detective Sarah Reynolds," Sarah replied calmly, showing her badge. "I'd like to speak with you about the incident involving the delivery of medical equipment intended for Mr. Jenkins." Karen stiffened but quickly masked her unease with a forced smile. "Oh yes, of course. Please come in." She ushered Sarah inside, leading her to the living room. As they sat down, Karen launched into an explanation before Sarah could even ask a question. "You should know that I was merely enforcing HOA guidelines. That crate was completely inappropriate for our neighborhood, and I acted in the best interest of the community." Sarah listened silently, letting Karen talk. When Karen finally paused for breath, Sarah leaned forward slightly and said, "Ms. Thompson, do you realize that taking possession of property that doesn't belong to you constitutes theft?" Karen's eyes widened and she sputtered, "Theft? No, you misunderstand. I didn't steal anything. I simply removed the item until proper approval could be obtained. Surely you can see that I was protecting the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood." Sarah's expression remained neutral, betraying none of her thoughts. "Regardless of your intentions, Ms. Thompson, the fact remains that the equipment belongs to Mr. Jenkins and was delivered specifically for his use. By removing it, you interfered with his rights as the rightful owner." Karen bristled at this, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. Well, if Harold had followed proper protocol and submitted a request to the HOA board, none of this would have happened. He brought this on himself. Sarah raised an eyebrow but chose not to engage further in Karen's justifications. Instead, she changed the subject. "I understand that the crate is currently in your garage, is that correct?" "Yes," Karen admitted reluctantly, "but only because I was ensuring it wouldn't disrupt the neighborhood." "May I see it?" Sarah asked, her tone firm but polite. Karen hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the request. After a long pause, she stood up and led Sarah to the garage. Inside, the large crate sat untouched, exactly where Karen had left it. Sarah examined it closely, noting the manufacturer's label and Harold's name printed clearly on the side. She snapped a few photos with her phone for documentation purposes. Turning back to Karen, Sarah said, "Ms. Thompson, based on the evidence we've gathered, including witness statements and video footage, we have reason to believe that you knowingly took possession of property that does not belong to you. I'll need to confiscate this crate so it can be returned to its rightful owner." Karen's face turned red with anger. "You can't just take it. I'm the president of the HOA, and I'm entitled to enforce the rules however I see fit." Sarah's patience began to wear thin, but she kept her composure. "Ms. Thompson, being the president of an HOA doesn't give you the authority to override the law. You're welcome to discuss this matter with your attorney, but for now I must proceed with my investigation." With that, Sarah called for backup to assist in transporting the crate back to Harold's house. While waiting, she continued to observe Karen, noting her growing agitation. Despite her attempts to maintain control, Karen looked increasingly cornered, her usual air of superiority crumbling under the weight of the situation. As the crate was loaded onto a police vehicle, neighbors gathered outside, unable to resist witnessing the unfolding drama. Some clapped quietly, while others whispered comments about karma finally catching up to Karen. Lisa, the young mother who had offered Harold support earlier, gave him a thumbs up from across the street. Harold, standing on his porch, watched, silently, feeling a mix of relief and disbelief. Back at Karen's house, Sarah wrapped up her initial visit by informing Karen that she would likely face charges of grand theft. "We'll be in touch regarding any further developments," Sarah said firmly before heading back to her car. Karen, fuming, slammed the door shut behind her. She paced back and forth in her living room, muttering angrily to herself. How dare they accuse her of theft? She had only been doing her duty as HOA president. In her mind, the fault lay entirely with Harold and the manufacturer for failing to follow proper procedures. Unbeknownst to Karen, the case against her was stronger than ever. The security footage provided by Mark, combined with witness testimonies, and Sarah's meticulous documentation painted a damning picture. Even worse for Karen, the media had caught wind of the story. Reporters began showing up in the neighborhood, eager to dig deeper into the bizarre tale of the HOA president who hijacked a medical delivery. By evening, local news outlets were running headlines about HOA Karen and her antics. Neighbors fielded calls from journalists, some sharing their experiences with Karen's overbearing behavior, while others declined to comment. The story quickly gained traction online, with social media users chiming in to express outrage or amusement at Karen's expense. For Harold, the attention was overwhelming, but also validating. For years, he had endured Karen's criticisms and nitpicking without complaint, believing it was easier to let things slide. Now, seeing the community rally around him and justice being served made him feel hopeful for the first time in a long while. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her investigation, determined to ensure accountability. She reviewed every piece of evidence multiple times, double-checking facts and preparing for the possibility of legal proceedings. Though Karen's actions seemed absurd on the surface, Sarah knew that cases like these required careful handling. Grand theft was a serious charge, and she wanted to make sure the prosecution's case was airtight. As the day drew to a close, the neighborhood settled into an uneasy calm. Karen stayed indoors, avoiding the prying eyes of reporters and the judgmental stares of her neighbors. Harold, on the other hand, felt a renewed sense of peace. The stolen equipment was on its way back to him, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to imagine a future where he could focus on healing instead of fighting. What no one realized yet was that this was only the beginning. The fallout from Karen's actions would ripple through the community for weeks to come, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and the lengths some would go to maintain control. And Detective Sarah Reynolds was just getting started. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with anticipation. The events of the previous day had left everyone talking, and whispers about Karen Thompson's fate spread like wildfire. Some neighbors expressed relief that someone had finally stood up to her, while others remained cautious, unsure of what would happen next. But one thing was certain: Karen's reputation as the untouchable HOA president was crumbling faster than anyone could have imagined. Detective Sarah Reynolds arrived at the police station early, ready to finalize the paperwork needed to officially charge Karen with grand theft. She reviewed the evidence once more, ensuring every detail was accounted for. The security footage from Mark's Ring doorbell camera was particularly damning. It showed Karen confronting the delivery driver, inspecting the crate, and then dragging it into her garage without hesitation. Witness statements corroborated the video, painting a clear picture of Karen's deliberate actions. Armed with a warrant, Sarah returned to Karen's house later that afternoon. This time, she wasn't there to ask questions or gather evidence. She was there to make an arrest. As she approached the front door, Karen answered almost immediately, her face pale and drawn. It was obvious she hadn't slept well. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed her anxiety. "Ms. Thompson," Sarah began, her tone calm but authoritative, "you are under arrest for grand theft. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." Karen gasped, her mouth falling open in shock. "What? No, you can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president. I was protecting the community." Sarah didn't respond to Karen's protests. Instead, she recited Karen's rights as she cuffed her wrists gently but firmly. Neighbors who had been watching from their windows or yards quickly gathered, phones in hand, capturing every moment. Some looked horrified, others satisfied, and a few even chuckled quietly at the absurdity of the situation. As Sarah led Karen to the police car, Karen continued to rant, her voice growing louder and more desperate. "This is ridiculous. I didn't steal anything. That equipment ruined the aesthetic of our neighborhood. Someone had to do something." Her words only fueled the murmurs among the crowd. Lisa, the young mother, shook her head in disbelief. "She really doesn't get it, does she?" she muttered to Ralph, who stood nearby. Ralph sighed, adjusting his glasses. Some people never do. Once Karen was securely in the back seat of the patrol car, Sarah closed the door and turned to address the onlookers. "Thank you all for your cooperation during this investigation," she said. "Justice will be served and Mr. Jenkins will receive the equipment he needs." The crowd dispersed slowly, many still discussing what they had just witnessed. For some, it felt like a long overdue reckoning. Others couldn't believe how far Karen had gone, and how quickly her downfall had come. At the police station, Karen sat in an interrogation room, fidgeting nervously. Her usual confidence was nowhere to be found, replaced by a mix of anger and fear. When Sarah entered the room, Karen launched into another tirade. "You don't understand, I was doing my job. The HOA guidelines are clear and Harold broke them." Sarah took a seat across from her, setting a file folder on the table. "Ms. Thompson, let's be clear. Enforcing HOA rules does not give you the right to take someone else's property. The equipment belonged to Mr. Jenkins and you knowingly removed it from his possession. That's theft, plain and simple." Karen slammed her fist on the table, her frustration boiling over. "But it's not just about the equipment. It's about maintaining order in this community. If I let one person break the rules, what's to stop everyone else from doing the same?" Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying Karen carefully. "Maintaining order is important, yes. But so is respecting people's rights. You crossed a line, Ms. Thompson, and now you'll have to face the consequences." For the first time since her arrest, Karen fell silent. The weight of Sarah's words seemed to sink in, though whether she truly understood the gravity of her actions remained unclear. Back in the neighborhood, life began to return to normal, or as close to normal as it could get after such a dramatic event. Harold received the confiscated equipment later that evening, thanks to Detective Sarah personally overseeing its safe return. He inspected it carefully, relieved to find it mostly undamaged despite Karen's mishandling. With the device finally in his possession, Harold felt a renewed sense of hope for his recovery. News of Karen's arrest dominated local headlines the following day. Reporters dubbed her HOA Karen, and the story quickly went viral online. Social media users weighed in with memes, jokes, and commentary about the length some homeowners association leaders will go to enforce their rules. While some sympathized with Karen's desire to maintain order, most agreed that her actions were extreme and unjustifiable. In the days that followed, Karen appeared in court for her arraignment. Dressed in a bland orange jumpsuit, her hair unkempt, and her demeanor defeated, she looked nothing like the polished woman who once strutted around the neighborhood wielding a clipboard. The judge set bail, and Karen was released pending trial, though she was ordered to stay away from Harold and the HOA board members. Karen's absence from the neighborhood created a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Without her constant scrutiny, residents began to relax. Flowers bloomed in gardens that Karen had previously deemed too colorful, and cars occasionally parked on driveways without fear of retribution. For the first time in years, people felt free to live their lives without worrying about arbitrary rules. Harold, meanwhile, focused on regaining his strength with the help of his new medical equipment. He attended physical therapy sessions regularly and slowly regained his independence. Neighbors checked in on him often, offering support and encouragement. Lisa even brought over homemade meals, insisting that Harold deserved a break after everything he'd been through. As weeks passed, preparations for Karen's trial began in earnest. Prosecutors built a strong case against her, relying heavily on the security footage, witness testimonies, and expert analysis of the stolen equipment's value. Defense attorneys argued that Karen's intentions were noble, claiming she believed she was acting in the best interest of the community. However, the prosecution countered that good intentions did not excuse illegal behavior. The trial itself became a media sensation, drawing attention nationwide. Dubbed the case of HOA Karen, it highlighted the dangers of unchecked power within homeowners associations and sparked debates about the balance between community standards and individual rights. Journalists camped outside the courthouse daily, eager to report on every twist and turn. Throughout the proceedings, Karen maintained her innocence, repeating the same arguments she had made during her arrest. She claimed she was being unfairly targeted and accused Harold of trying to undermine the HOA's authority. Her defense team attempted to paint her as a misunderstood figure, but the evidence spoke for itself. In the end, the jury deliberated for less than a day before returning a guilty verdict. Karen was convicted of grand theft and sentenced to 6 months in jail, along with hefty fines and mandatory community service. The judge emphasized that her actions had caused significant harm to Harold and disrupted the harmony of the neighborhood. As Karen was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Harold watched silently from the gallery. He didn't feel triumphant or vindicated, just relieved that the ordeal was finally over. For him, the real victory lay in the support he had received from his neighbors and the knowledge that justice had prevailed. With Karen out of the picture, the HOA board held emergency meetings to elect a new president. Ralph, the retired lawyer, was chosen unanimously, and he promised to lead with fairness and transparency. Under his guidance, the neighborhood adopted more reasonable guidelines, focusing on collaboration rather than control. Life in the cul-de-sac gradually returned to a peaceful rhythm. Kids played outside without fear of Karen scolding their parents for leaving toys on the lawn. Gardeners experimented with vibrant flower arrangements, adding color and charm to the streets. And Harold, now stronger and healthier, enjoyed quiet evenings on his porch, grateful for the second chance he'd been given. Though the memory of Karen's misdeeds lingered, it served as a reminder of the importance of compassion, accountability, and respect. For Detective Sarah Reynolds, the case reinforced her belief that no act of justice is too small, and sometimes, standing up to bullies can lead to unexpected victories. As for the neighborhood, they emerged stronger and more united than ever, ready to move forward together. The aftermath of Karen Thompson's arrest and conviction rippled through the neighborhood in ways no one could have predicted. What began as a bizarre incident involving a stolen medical delivery transformed into a turning point for the entire community. Neighbors who had once tiptoed around Karen's strict rules now found themselves breathing easier, free from her constant scrutiny. The cul-de-sac, once tense and muted under her watchful eye, slowly blossomed into a place where laughter echoed. Again, gardens flourished with creativity, and friendships deepened. Harold Jenkins became something of a local hero. His quiet resilience during the ordeal earned him widespread admiration. People admired how he handled the situation with grace, refusing to stoop to Karen's level despite the frustration she caused. When Harold finally began using his new medical equipment, a sleek, state-of-the-art mobility aid designed specifically for his needs, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He started taking short walks around the block each afternoon, greeting neighbors warmly and sharing stories about his recovery journey. These small interactions helped mend old wounds and fostered a spirit of camaraderie that had been missing for years. Lisa, the young mother who had stood by Harold from the beginning, took it upon herself to organize a welcome-back gathering in his honor. She invited everyone on the street, setting up folding chairs and tables in her driveway. There were homemade snacks, lemonade, and even a cake decorated with flowers to celebrate Harold's progress. It was the first time in ages that the entire neighborhood came together without the shadow of HOA drama hanging over them. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the cul-de-sac, Lisa raised a glass to Harold. "To Harold," she said, her voice warm and heartfelt, "for showing us all what strength and kindness look like, and to our community, for coming together when it mattered most." Applause broke out, followed by cheers and laughter. Harold smiled shyly, raising his own glass in response. "Thank you, everyone," he said softly. "I couldn't have gotten through this without your support. This neighborhood is special because of people like you." As the party continued, conversations turned to the future. Ralph, the newly elected HOA president, announced plans to revamp the association's guidelines. "We're going to focus on collaboration instead of control," he explained. "No more nitpicking over tiny details. Let's work together to make this a place we're all proud to call home." The crowd nodded approvingly. Many voiced their ideas for improving the neighborhood, from organizing seasonal potlucks to creating a shared garden space. For the first time in years, residents felt empowered to contribute, not out of obligation or fear, but because they genuinely cared about making their community better. Meanwhile, Detective Sarah Reynolds reflected on the case as she sat at her desk later that week. Though it had been unusual, perhaps even absurd at times, it reminded her why she chose a career in law enforcement. Every day she encountered people who abused power or acted selfishly, believing they were above the rules. But cases like Karen's proved that accountability existed, even in the smallest corners of society. Sarah also marveled at the resilience of Harold and his neighbors. Despite the chaos Karen unleashed, they had come out stronger on the other side. "It's amazing what people can accomplish when they stand up for what's right," she mused aloud to a colleague. "This isn't just about catching criminals, it's about protecting communities." Back in the neighborhood, life moved forward at a steady pace. Kids rode bikes down the street, families hosted barbecues in their backyards, and weekend garage sales brought everyone together. Even Karen's house, which had sat empty since her arrest, found new life. A young couple purchased it, eager to start fresh in a welcoming environment. They introduced themselves to their neighbors with plates of cookies and promises to keep their lawn tidy, but not obsessively so. Karen herself served her 6-month sentence quietly, keeping mostly to herself during her time in jail. Her fines were steep, and her mandatory community service involved cleaning public parks, a fitting punishment, many thought, given her obsession with aesthetics. When she was released, she chose not to return to the neighborhood. Instead, she moved to a smaller apartment downtown, far away from the prying eyes of those who knew her story. Though some neighbors initially worried Karen might try to reclaim her role in the HOA, Ralph assured everyone that wouldn't happen. "She's barred from holding any leadership position here," he said firmly. "And besides, we've moved past her. Our focus is on building something better." Months passed, and the neighborhood thrived. Harold's health improved significantly, thanks to his new equipment and the encouragement of his friends. He even joined a local senior center, where he participated in art classes and card games. Lisa's children often visited him, bringing handmade drawings and updates about school projects. In turn, Harold taught them how to plant flowers in his garden, passing along wisdom he'd accumulated over decades. Ralph's leadership brought positive changes to the HOA. Meetings became less formal and more inclusive, with input welcomed from all members. The board approved several initiatives aimed at fostering connection, including a book club, a monthly movie night, and a volunteer program to assist elderly residents with household tasks. These efforts strengthened bonds between neighbors, creating a true sense of belonging. One crisp autumn evening, as leaves crunched underfoot and the air carried a hint of wood smoke, the neighborhood gathered for its annual fall festival. Strings of lights twinkled above picnic tables laden with food, while children darted around playing tag. At the center of it all stood Harold, seated comfortably in his mobility aid, surrounded by smiling faces. Detective Sarah Reynolds attended the event as well, having grown fond of the tight-knit community during her investigation. As she mingled, with residents thanking them for their cooperation, she couldn't help but feel proud of what they had achieved. "You guys did good," she told Ralph with a smile. "Not every neighborhood bounces back like this after something so divisive." Ralph chuckled. "It wasn't easy, but we realized that sticking together was the only way forward. Karen may have caused trouble, but in a way, she showed us what we didn't want to be, and that made all the difference." As fireworks lit up the night sky, signaling the end of the festival, Harold leaned back in his chair, gazing at the colorful bursts. He thought about everything that had happened, the frustration, the fear, the triumph, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. His neighbors weren't perfect. They argued sometimes, forgot to water plants, or left trash cans out overnight. But they were human. And that, he decided, was enough. In the weeks and months that followed, the story of HOA Karen faded into legend retold with humor and warmth at dinner parties and family gatherings. It served as a reminder that power unchecked could lead to ruin, but unity and compassion could heal even the deepest wounds. The neighborhood emerged stronger, kinder, and more connected than ever before, a testament to the resilience of its people and the power of standing together against injustice. And so life in the cul-de-sac carried on, filled with laughter, love, and the simple joys of everyday living. For Harold, Lisa, Ralph, and their neighbors, it was proof that even in the face of adversity, there was always hope for a brighter tomorrow.